Today we're going inside the minds and plot twists of four murder mystery writers. Welcome everyone. Before we start, remember to subscribe and click the bell, and if you want to be on a panel, click the link in the description below the video. We have a spectacular murder mystery writer panel with us today. Danielle Girard is the award-winning best-selling author of 13 novels, including Dead Center, book 1 of the Rookie Club series. Jack Huber is the author of 7 books in the Pat Ruger mystery series. His latest book is City Mayhem. Christine Evelyn Volker is the award-winning author of Venetian Blood, Murder in a Sensuous City. William J. Goyette is the author of In Our Blood, the first in a series of detective thrillers featuring Detective Jake Hawksworth. So let's jump right into it. Can you introduce us to the lead character in your novel and tell us if he or she is based on you, and also why you write crime?
I guess I can start. My main character's name is Pat Ruger. He's a retired detective out of Denver, Colorado. He has a variety of characters that he enlists to help solve his mysteries. They actually come on and begin a investigative firm, a PI firm. My current book, City Mayhem, takes place in Nashville, and the reason that that locale was chosen, part of it was that he's now living full-time in an RV, as I am. So it makes for an interesting story. As far as why I'm writing crime, I've always been interested in crime fiction ever since I was a teenager and reading Joseph Wambaugh. I'm interested in not only how he writes crime, but the detectives and their thought processes and what do they think of first and what are their practices and procedures when they're investigating.
I guess I can go next. I'm Danielle Girard, and the main character of my series is a sex crimes inspector named Jamie Vale in the San Francisco Police Department. And that is, she's way tougher and cooler and more resilient than I could ever be. I think I write about somebody who I can imagine would be really cool to be, but not somebody that I would ever be. As far as writing suspense or thrillers, to be honest, when I started my first book, I was 23. I didn't know what I was going to write about. On page 5, somebody died, and that was the way it's been ever since. I do think that the stakes of thrillers are amazing. The life and death, there's nothing greater than that. And for that reason, I think the pull of a book can be so much more intense. And I love that intensity.
Hi, I'm Bill Goyette. My character's name is Jake Hawksworth. Jake's kind of a multi-dimensional character. He's what I call a non-superhero. He's more of an everyman. He can't leap tall buildings, and he can't save the world from total destruction. But he's the kind of guy, the underdog, that we all root for. And he has a lot of flaws. He can be very impulsive at times. He's also very gruff at times. And he has to keep his patience in check at all times. And that's something that I kind of relate to, because I can be a little bit impatient at times. So I'm a little like Jake in that way. But I think what Jake and I have most in common is with our relationships with our daughters. In the story, Jake has a very strong bond with his daughter Nikki, who has lost her mom, and that plays into the plot a little bit. I won't give anything away there, but I have 2 daughters, and I'm fiercely protective of them, the way Jake is in the novel, and sometimes to a fault. So Jake ends up his relationship with Nikki is very real and heartfelt, but he does find himself getting himself into trouble because of that in several occasions. As far as why I write crime, I've just always had an interest in crime novels and in detective shows. To me, it was always a game. I always wanted to see if I could solve the crime before the detective, like Columbo, for example. And oftentimes I did. So I think that's what intrigued me the whole world of crime fiction.
Hi, I'm Christine Volker again. The main character in Venetian Blood, Murder in a Sensuous City, is Anna Lucia Laudel. Her life actually echoes my own in the 1990s, traveling to Venice, working in finance, heading to divorce from a failed and childless marriage with all of the heartbreak that brings. So I'm an example of how your own pain can be a starting point for writing a book. Like Anna, I was also seduced, in my case by Venice, in her case by a Venetian count. She's a math and science whiz, which I wish I were, but I'm not. But she needs that big brain to save herself when the police suspect her of murder. Unlike me, she keeps her emotions tightly wound up, scared to let them out for fear that they'll overwhelm her, like the sea invades the land in Venice. I write murder mysteries because they wrestle with the most fundamental issues on this planet, life and death. Nothing could be more basic or more important. So Anna must match wits, not just with the police, but with the killer as she struggles to clear her name, uncover clues, and evade the murderer. There's a macabre chess game going on. Finally, I'd say that in the time in which we live, a time of cynicism and amorality, it can be comforting, as in most murder mysteries, to find a small corner of the world where we know that at the end, justice will prevail and the killer will get what he or she deserves.
So true. I want to know, Jack, how long have you been living in an RV? And where are you parked right now?
Yes, so we've been living full time. We sold our house back a year ago, April. So it's been almost a year and a half, and we've visited and actually stayed in 26 states right now, all over the country. So we're having a ball.
And you're still married? Because that would
Yes.
be really hard.
It's interesting because if both partners are not really on board with this lifestyle, it usually doesn't work out very well. And I'm very fortunate in that we both wanted to do this a lot. So
yes.
And you're doing a good job of picking up your clothes off the floor. That would be where it'd be tricky.
Well, we have fewer
That would be a
clothes.
deal breaker.
That's right. That's right.
We have fewer clothes to worry about, so that's at least one advantage.
Yes, there you
But
go.
But what came first, Jack? Did you live in the RV before your character did, or how did that part, the timing work?
It's interesting. We've been planning to live in an RV for about 15 years, and as it got closer to retirement, we actually did a lot of things to make that happen. But I started writing Pat Ruger before we went full time, knowing that in the future that's probably what I was going to do with that character.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a write what you know, but also how to keep life interesting for a character, and I think it has done that.
Life imitates art, and art imitates life. Yep.
That's right.
Yeah, I found it very difficult going to Venice 10, 12 times as I have had to do. And to get
Wow, I guess I need to get more creative about where
I know. I need to take Jake out of Boston.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
Needs to go international.
So let's go to the next question, which is, what is the anatomy of a murder? What makes a good murder plot? And can you take us into the darkest corners of your mind where you hatch up your characters and plot?
Well, I don't know about anatomy of a murder, but a murder mystery has to have the basis for a full-length story. Interesting, if not quirky, characters. And it has to be an interesting adventure for the main character, in this case, Pat Ruger, based on his interests. What would hook him into wanting to spend his retirement time helping solve a crime, especially a murder? He's a frustrated retired cop. He always seems to get dragged in unwillingly to these investigations, and he has to figure out what is his impetus in solving that crime. Where does he benefit? Where does his friends and family benefit from that? And that's what draws him in. He's a very reluctant hero in many of these books. Doesn't really want the limelight at all, and rather would be on someone else.
I think for Jamie Vale, you know, she's a sex crimes inspector, so the law enforcement aspects of the books are her life. But I think similar to what Jack is saying, she's also a reluctant participant in this particular crime, because the woman who is dead is the woman who had an affair with her husband, who is now her ex-husband, and the primary suspect is her ex-husband. So she really wants nothing to do with that. That part of her life is carefully closeted behind her, and she is pushing forward, albeit, you know, she's struggling, and with not just a little bit of bitterness. So when he comes to her for help, every bone in her body wants to say no. But the thing is, if you're somebody who believes in justice and you believe that your ex-husband isn't guilty of murder, then you have to help him. And that's what she does. So she's forced to take a side of somebody who broke her heart and who she hates a little bit. But she does the right thing. And I think that's what I love, as we were talking about, the anatomy of a really great crime is somebody who has to be involved, who has to solve a crime, even if they don't want to, even if they want nothing to do with it, but it's in their DNA to get involved and find the killer, and whether it's part of their job, but also that it's part of just who they are. It's their identity on multiple levels. And it is for sure for Jamie.
And how do you get the plot twists and so on? Like, where does that come to you? Does it in the middle of the night, or is it when you wake up in the morning, or does it come to you as like an entire book plot already, or?
An entire plot already? That would be fabulous.
I actually heard people say that about their books.
No. I do find there's that little time right before you fall asleep. I don't know if the rest of you guys have that, where you're kind of unpacking your mind. And I keep a notepad and pen by my bed, because I'll drive my husband crazy scribbling before bed. So
yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah, that's really useful.
So I write in my head, and I write while I'm sleeping, and I do all of those same things. I've been known to get up at 2 a.m. and go write a chapter or two in the middle of the night. But the plot doesn't really come first for me. It's the characters that come first, and the characters sort of make things happen to me. And when I start writing a book, I might not even know yet who was murdered or why, but the characters will drive that.
So to me, the best drawn murder plots are the ones that toy with the reader, begging them to solve that crime and to see that big twist coming. But it also has to play fair with the reader. I'm sure we've all read books where there's a plot twist that just isn't believable. And it comes out of left field, and you think, there's no way I could have figured that out. So to me, the reader should be given the same opportunity to solve the crime as the detective in the novel. Because otherwise they're going to feel duped. And In Our Blood has 3 big reveals, and I feel I played fair with the reader on all 3 of these. I even had some readers say to me, I can't believe I missed that clue. It was literally staring me in the face. So that made me feel good. And if they went back, they really were able to find subtle clues that were embedded in the story. So I do feel like I played fair, and I often do read books where it frustrates me when that happens.
Well, in Venetian Blood, Anna, a tourist, doesn't want to be a sleuth, but she's a suspect in a murder of a man with whom she's had an affair. So you could say that her freedom and her life are hanging in the balance. But lucky for her, she's very bright. She works in anti-money laundering in the U.S. Treasury Department. Anna has certain tools that she could use because she works in anti-money laundering. And these are global tools which she could use while she's in Italy to help solve the crime. She was stymied in trying to discover evidence because she doesn't have access to what the police do have, since after all, she's a suspect, not a detective. And she also has a big problem because all of the friends and business associates of the despicable dead man are hiding their past, or hiding things from her. So she really is put to the test. For me, a good murder plot takes the reader on the shoulders of the main character, lets them, in this case, see, hear, and smell Venice. So I try to surprise them with curves and swerves of the plot. And I also love a mystery that goes beyond just a basic whodunit into one that has rich backstories where readers can learn about cultures and perspectives beyond their own. The way that I approach the writing is that my characters and the plot grow out of the setting. So essentially, I'm building a very dark dollhouse. So for Venetian Blood, each of the rooms is a different scene in Venice. So you have the characters like Anna the tourist, who's one step away from being overwhelmed. Her friend Margot's a semi-local. You have expatriates, artists, counts, gondoliers. I put them together in scenes and figure out what each one wants, what each one fears, what each one is hiding to bring it alive. I also play with the past. And this is really perfect in an historic city like Venice, because the question of what's real and what's not is paramount there. What's behind the mask? And that's certainly befitting for the murderer, who's always trying to seem, who's always trying to seem what he or she is not.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
I write in first person. Do any of the rest of you do that?
No, I do not.
I'm third person, multiple point of view, always.
I'm third person, multiple point of view.
Hard.
Third close.
First person was sort of a revelation to me, and it was how I can bring, as you were discussing earlier, bring the audience along with the main character. If the main character doesn't hear it or see it, neither does the audience or the readership. So I found that to be very helpful to me.
Yeah. Close third, I use close third, and it's essentially the same. There's no, but it's just not the I. I don't know why I have struggled to write in the I perspective. So
yeah, I do the similar thing, Danielle, where I'm writing in third person, but you almost feel like you're in Jake's head.
Yeah, you can be. I think you are in their heads, even if it's but it's not. I don't know. But I do love books in first person, and I love books in third person. I think it's whatever feels like it works for the author. So makes total sense.
You should all contribute to a short story where all of you, these detectives, meet in an exotic locale.
That would be fun.
Like Bali or Barbados, and they all go on vacation, and this like murder mystery happens in the
I love it.
In the resort.
Only if I get to go too. Hold on.
Well, you have to go. You have to go to write the plot. So there you go. Exactly.
Right. Do the research.
So I think we've all at some point toyed with the idea of being an amateur detective or PI. What equipment and skills do we need, and how can we find the mystery in our own neighborhoods without getting into too much trouble?
You have to think like a detective if you're going to write like a detective. So I think you need to find the mystery in everyday occurrences. A normal person, for example, might think, that guy sitting across from me on the train seems a little bit creepy. Whereas a writer will think, that guy may have just murdered his wife, or maybe he has a gun hidden and he's going to take all the passengers hostage. To me, it's that kind of thinking that generates fresh ideas. And one example from my personal experience, I used to drive by a house every day. It was this old rundown house, and the shades were always drawn. It was always dark, except occasionally there would be one light on, and that light was in the basement.
Wow.
Oh, that's crazy.
Where is that book? Have you written that one yet, Bill?
So the writer in me concocted this scenario where a serial killer lived there, and he was doing something really awful in the basement. And one day I actually saw the actual owner in the driveway, and he did look a little creepy, but he didn't look like the serial killer type to me, although Ted Bundy didn't either, so who knows?
Right, and how about Gacy had all those bodies buried in the basement?
Exactly.
So all he needs is a clown costume and he's ready to go.
Yes.
That reminds me of when I was young. I grew up in the Los Angeles area, one of the suburbs, and as a teenager, we used to wander around at night in small groups, and not really a gang, but we kind of hung out together. And there was this one house a couple of miles from home. It was in the middle of some industrial areas, but it was a house in the middle of this. And there was never anyone there until about 11 o'clock at night. And then we would see cars coming and parking and staying for a little while and then leaving. And so we would go back and back again and back again, and we'd see this about 3 times a week. And we just had all kinds of things that in our heads as to why these people were meeting at this strange house.
Yeah. I think this all ties into like worst case scenario thinking, which I think is sort of it's a writer attribute. I mean, my very first book was written, I'd read an article in the New York Times magazine about a police officer who had lost the use of his hands and how sort of difficult it was for him to sort of come to terms with that with not being able to shoot a gun and not be able to do his job. And so I thought, wow, what if you have this woman officer who is hunting a serial killer and he attacks her and he cuts all the tendons in her hand. Ooh. Like he's kind of like a Leonardo da Vinci type. And then he has to hunt him without being able to use her hands. And that was the basis for my first book, Savage Art. So I think it's right. You can take anything that's normal minutia of everyday life and twist it into something really dark. And my whole family is like, Mom, what are you thinking about that cat? Or what do you see over there? I mean, because it's just always going.
Yes.
So like Anna, you might not need any equipment beyond your own capabilities to be an amateur detective. She certainly was pulled into the role, being a suspect. But you have to have strong powers of observation, burning curiosity, an analytical mind, and knowledge of the human foibles and psychology, plus the unshakable desire to want to see justice done. And as people have said, you really need to be suspicious, thinking that if you scratch the surface, you'll find something out of place, out of kilter, something surprising. You also might have to roll up your sleeves and do a lot of research, which some people may find boring, but that could be in a library, in archives, in interviews, or even talking to a town gossip. But basically, in essence, you believe that things are not what they seem. And generally, in mysteries, you'd be right.
That's right.
Well, I think equipment is helpful, like surveillance equipment and camera equipment, and Pat Ruger definitely uses some of that. But I think more important are his skills as a detective. Since he's a retired detective, he originally was trained in observation, and he knows that the answers that are given to him by people in the story aren't always truthful, and so he has that suspicious mind as well. He also is good at reading people, so that's a skill that only the best detectives really have, I think. People like to think they can do that, but the people who can really do that are one step ahead. And then he has the ability of saying doing a lot of what if analysis. So what if this, what if that? And he'll do that for quite a long time with a scenario until he comes up with something that makes sense. So a lot of his skills were learned, and some were inherent in him already on how to do this detective type investigation.
Can you put us into your character's mindset and right into the action of a scene?
So the book that just came out in July is called Expire, and the main character is a medical examiner, a San Francisco medical examiner named Annabelle Schwartzman. And this is from her perspective. I wake up after being drugged, and I realize I'm not in my home. I am numb. I'm in a room I don't recognize. It's dark. I'm afraid I'm not alone, but I am. I start to feel the room and I realize I'm on a bed. At first I'm worried about being in something locked like a coffin, but I'm not. And that makes me feel slightly calmer. But as I move, I hear a strange zipping sound and I don't know where it's coming from. Like maybe I'm being recorded or maybe there's something else sliding in the room. So I shift up in the bed and I feel a tug on my neck. And as my hands work their way up my body, I realize that there is a collar on my neck. And I feel around it, it's a thick kind of silicone rubber. And in the back, there's a latch. And I feel there's a tie to a ceiling. And as I shift it, I can feel something metal moving on a track. So I'm in a room on a leash.
Wow.
That's
That was great. I feel like I'm still there. I feel like I'm on that leash.
all I can tell you. That's all I got. Okay.
If you want to know, to our viewers, if you want to know more, you've got to read her book, Expire.
That's right.
She shouldn't have gone first.
Well, we can do another female in distress in my book before we switch to yours, if you want.
Okay. Go ahead, Christine.
Okay. So this is, again, Venetian Blood, Murder in a Sensuous City, and the main character, Anna Lucia Laudal, who is a tourist in Venice, but becomes a suspect in the murder of a Venetian count. So I will be inside her head in Venice, Italy. My wrist still hurts from when the policeman grabbed me in front of Santa Lucia train station and dragged me down here to the damp interrogation room. Why did they pick me up? They were looking for paper in their hands. What? It smells musty in here. I'm sitting on a rickety chair, and the far end of the room is lined with mirrors. Police must be on the other side studying me like scientists study parameciums. My right leg is twitching, and I'm hearing a noise like water seeping into the room. How far above the canal am I? I have dreams about drowning. Am I stuck inside here? Is the door locked? Will I drown? Calm, just calm, breathe in and out. What a mistake to come to Venice. First Sergio and now this. How can I get out of here? Grandpa warned me never to come to Venice. I should have listened to him. I remember what he said a few years before he died. Venetians are as slippery as eels. Jack, my husband, soon to be my ex-husband, won't help me. He couldn't care less about me rotting away in jail, except he'll start caring when I lose my job and can't pay the mortgage and the bank takes back our home. Will they even let me make a phone call? To whom? I feel so alone. The door just banged open. A blonde man. He's coming toward me. He must be the interrogator. He has icy blue eyes, cruel eyes. They give me the creeps.
Oh, boy.
So that's poor Anna stuck in the room.
I like it. That's two Annas too, by the way. My Annabelle and Anna are both like locked up.
I liked Anna because it was a palindrome, so it was a reflection of itself horizontally, and everything in Venice is a vertical reflection. But anyway.
Anna's
I
in
never
trouble,
thought of that.
people. You have to read their books to get Anna out of trouble. You can't leave her there.
So from the viewpoint of Pat Ruger, in Music City Mayhem, of course, Pat is a retired detective. He's on the road in an RV in a campground. And so Pat, so this is Pat. I get involved when bad guys include me and someone close to me with their original targets. So I naturally have to try to resolve the problem. Hard as I try to remain retired, I just can't ignore impending acts of violence affecting those close to me. So here I am in the campground, and I have made friends of a singing duo in Nashville, Bobby and June. And my dog wakes me up and in the evening, and I come out and there's members of a gang out in front of my campsite. They are eager for me to stop any relationship I have with Bobby and June. They threaten physical harm to them and myself. And so, of course, now I am entirely involved. So you'll have to find out what happens by getting that book, Music City Mayhem.
So the scene I'm going to talk about, this is where we get a sense of Jake and his partner Kyle Henderson. He's this young rookie, kind of a ladies' man, really wet behind the ears, and Jake is this kind of grizzled, old school cop. So they kind of have this banter throughout the book, and it's a lot of teasing among each other. So this kind of gives you, this is toward the beginning of the book, the first murder scene that actually takes place that does weave into the rest of the plot. And so this is them as they're going into the coroner's office, as they're about to, this is Kyle's first time actually in a coroner's office. Mm-hmm. So the corridor leading to the medical examiner's office seems to go on forever. As my partner and I grow nearer to the polished steel doors, I can sense his anxiety growing. Unlike me, Kyle's a real newbie at this. As we enter, the antiseptic smell of death jams itself up my nostrils. I watch with amusement as Kyle's initial shock turns to glee, looking around at all the shiny toys. He's like a kid in a candy store. Amy Lynn, the coroner, is a very small woman with a very big personality, but she's also a real pro at what she does. I feel like a voyeur as I gaze at the bruised corpse on display before us. As Amy Lynn describes the technical details of the woman's wounds, I see Kyle's face go white. But I see something else too in his eyes, curiosity. When Kyle asks about the cause of death, Amy Lynn replies, "Blunt force trauma," in a very pleasant voice. Funny, I think. Those are 3 words I would never think to say pleasantly. Amy Lynn proceeds to tell us about her thoughts on the weapon, the murder weapon, perhaps a baseball bat, she says. When I tell her that we found nothing like that at the murder scene, her reply makes my blood run cold. Maybe he's planning on using it again, she says. Want to help Jake solve this case that will lead him back to an unsolved cold case that has haunted him for decades? Then you'll have to read In Our Blood and meet the newest voice in crime fiction, Jake Hawksworth.
So to all our viewers, don't forget to subscribe. Expire, Music City Mayhem, Venetian Blood, and In Our Blood are available on Amazon. Links are in the description below, as well as links to our panelists' websites, DanielleGirard.com, JackHuber.com, ChristineVolkerAuthor.com, and on Facebook, William Goyette. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
This was great, panelists.
Great to meet you guys.